Доброе утро, дорогие друзья. Я Владимир Майков, президент Ассоциации трансперсональной психологии и психотерапии. Я очень рад видеть вас здесь. Мы сегодня начинаем семинар, двухдневный семинар, дающийся мастера психологии и психотерапии.
On the first day of our two-day seminar by our Stanislav Grof, the founder of the method of holoscopic breathwork and one of the founders of transpersonal psychology. Stan arrived in Moscow from Prague yesterday. On the 5th of September, ex-president Gavel gave Stan the award called Vision 97 for outstanding achievement and opening up new ways of knowledge. Let's see a video clip from that ceremony. Yesterday, during his first day in Moscow, Stan went to attend an event in the psychology department of the Moscow State University. There he was awarded with the title of Professor Emeritus of Moscow University. And there he gave his first lecture in his capacity of Professor Emeritus of Moscow University on psychology in the 21st century, its prospects. Now I want to give the floor to our chief information sponsor of Stan Grof's visit to Moscow, Mr. Edward Sagalayev, President of the Broadcasting Union of Russia. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Calling myself a sponsor is really way too much, although it's true. More importantly, I'm a great fan of Stanislav Grof's. I was fortunate enough to meet with him 2 years ago in Ireland in a seminar he was giving, and it was a very special moment for me. And I even underwent a session of holotropic breath work conducted by Stan and his disciples. This is an unforgettable experience, which was followed by reading some of Stan Grof's books, of which there are 15, or is it 14? The 15th is in the works. And all of that has left tremendous impression. The wealth of knowledge to be found in those books and to be found in that person is really remarkable. The aura of internal harmony, kindness and composure is something that this person has and many of us lack, especially here in Russia. Welcoming Stanislav Grof in Russia is an extremely important thing to do. All of you who heard his lecture yesterday or who are going to hear his lecture today and another one tomorrow, and who will have the chance to get first-hand knowledge of the exciting and tremendously important things that Stanislav Grof has to convey to us, and I hope you will all pass on the knowledge and the energy of Stanislav Grof to your family and friends. I want to welcome Stanislav Grof here. Thank you. We are living in a time of great hardships and human work to improve oneself and to resolve the psychological problems we might have plays a great role there. Psychotherapy plays an important role in easing this work. Now I'm giving the floor to the Vice President of the Professional Association of Psychotherapy of Russia, Ms. Galina Makarova, who has brought a surprise gift for Stan. Esteemed Mr. Stanislav Grof, colleagues and friends, the International Association of Psychotherapists has empowered me to inform you of the following. Upon application of the Psychotherapeutic League of Moscow and the Asian League of Psychotherapy, headed by Mr. Makarov, a decision was taken to award you with this award for outstanding contribution to the theory and practice of psychotherapy and for popularizing our field. We give this global certificate of psychotherapy to Mr. Stanislav Grof. I'm doing that on behalf of Mr. Alfred Prince, the President of the Global Union of Psychotherapists. I'd like to add a few words here. Stanislav speaks very good Russian and understands everything. That was the first thing. And the second is, I asked him once, how do you feel about Russians? You are a Czech person. You must remember 1968, the Russian tanks in Prague. He said, Edward, well, what can I do about that? I was a Russian in one of my former lives. And I suppose he means it. So, it is now time to begin this seminar, the first day of which will be devoted to the latest book of Professor Stanislav Grof, The Ultimate Journey, Consciousness and the Mystery of Death. And the second day of work will be devoted to the global crisis as viewed by transpersonal psychology and the measures to be taken by those who have taken in this wisdom.
Thank you very much again. Okay. Здравствуйте.
Good morning. As you've heard, I've learned a little bit of Russian, but it was 50 years ago, and currently I forgot a lot. So my apologies that I won't be able to make this presentation in Russian language. So we're using the assistance of interpreters.
Before I start my lecture, I would like to thank my friends Vladimir Maykov, Eduard Sagalayev, Alexei Kupsov, who invited me to Russia. It's a great pleasure to be back. This is not my first trip. I have been here 5 times, and I have many, many wonderful friends. I have many great memories. And feel very, very close to Russian people. I have particularly moving memories of my visit, in which I was given one of my books, the first book actually, Realms of the Human Unconscious, which was printed by Samizdat. And I realized the tremendous personal danger that the people had to undergo to produce that book. It was all printed on membranes. There were many, many pictures which had to be done in such a way that there was a screen and a stylus so that the lines of the pictures were turned into dots. And all the illustrations in the books were very carefully redrawn and produced as part of the Samizdat underground press. And I kept that book as a very, very precious souvenir until February 2001, when our house in San Francisco burned down with everything in it. But I still carry a very, very warm memory of that visit and of the tremendous sacrifice that the people had to exercise to produce the books in such a way. Now we are in a completely new situation, especially thanks to Volodya Maikov, who is the president of the Transpersonal Association, and he has now issued a whole series of Russian translations of the main books of transpersonal psychology, including my own books. And it seems that the interest in transpersonal psychology has been growing. At least it seems to me from one visit to another that there's definitely an increase in transpersonal psychology. So today we'll focus on a problem which is probably the most important problem we can imagine. This is problem of death. It's hard to imagine a more important problem, because as we go through life, each of us will lose relatives, friends, teachers, important figures in our life, and then sooner or later we will be confronted with this problem ourselves. And it's therefore very, very strange that until quite recently the industrial civilization not only paid very little attention to death, but actually actively avoided somehow looking at the problem of death. Before I start talking more specifically about death, I'd like to emphasize that I will be talking about it from a particular perspective. I grew up in Czechoslovakia, and then when I was 37 years old, I emigrated to the United States. So many of the things that I will be describing related to attitude of society to death and so on would be naturally based on my observations, particularly in the United States. And they might or might not apply to Russia, where, of course, the whole history is different, the political history is different, the economic situation is different. So you will have to take from it what applies to you and then see the rest of it as a kind of anthropological observation of what things are like in the United States. So we saw, in the United States, we saw incredible disregard for anything related to dying until basically the late 60s, when the situation began to change. This whole field was opened up by Elizabeth Kübler-Ross, a psychiatrist of Swiss origin, who did some systematic work with people dying, particularly dying of cancer, in a medical school in Chicago, and published a groundbreaking book which was called Death and Dying, bringing the attention of the public and of course also of the professionals to the fact that psychological, that dying people have certain psychological problems that we should pay attention to. Until then, we had a very strange situation where we had developed all kinds of methods of crisis intervention for a variety of situations, except the one which was the crisis of crisis, the crisis of people who were dying, who were facing a crisis which was biological, which was psychological, which was philosophical, which was spiritual, which was interpersonal. And this somehow remained the only area where no specific professional help was offered. There were systems of emotional support for people who had unwanted pregnancy, facing a variety of other problems. When I came to the United States, I was actually approached by people who were asking me if I needed emotional support because of my transition from Europe to the United States, into a country that had a different economical system, different political system, different language, and they presume that this must create problems for me that need professional help, which of course is a situation that was trivial as compared to the situation that a dying person is facing. There was also really no interest among professionals in the experiences associated with dying. What is happening psychologically to people who either are dying of some terminal disease or people who are put into a situation which is life-threatening in a kind of acute way, like in a car accident, a cardiac arrest during the operation, and so on. There were also very few support systems for dying people. The support systems were mostly technological, technology which almost approached science fiction. People were kept alive months and months after it really made any sense. Even people who were brain dead were kept artificially alive, and as they were surrounded by these incredible gadgets, these incredible machines, they really had very little human support. It was all at the expense of human support. There was a tendency in American society to somehow remove people who were sick, people who were old, people who were dying, so that they don't disturb emotionally those who were surviving. In the United States, it's reached extremes. There's a place in Los Angeles which is called Forest Lawn. It's a famous cemetery where many of the very rich people are buried, and they offer services. As for example, if you bring your dead relative there, they offer a plastic operation to arrange a nice smile in the coffin, so that people have the most pleasant or the least unpleasant situation. You can have a posthumous barber, who will comb people properly. You can pay for a tailor who would make special clothes for the person, and they do everything they can so that the person in the coffin looks in such a way that it's not disturbing for the survivors. My wife and I have been in Benares several times, and to see the contrast, the way the Hindus deal with death in Benares, and to come to a place like Forest Lawn was just incredible. You know, in Benares, death is simply accepted as part of life. And many people go to Benares to die because they believe that it's important from a karmic perspective. And along the Ganges are ghats, staircases, and one of those ghats is a burning ghat where the families bring the relatives to be burned in open pyres. So they create a funeral pyre. They would lay the dead person on this pyre. They set it on fire, and as they watch the person burning, they are having basically a picnic around. And then when I was there, I saw several instances where the son is the duty to release the consciousness of the father. So at a certain critical moment, takes a hatchet and splits the skull to release the spirit, and then then the process ends, and basically it looks more like a celebration of the life of that person, rather than some kind of a tragedy. But the ability of people to face death as a fact of life, as compared to what we see, for example, in the United States, is just absolutely incredible. There are some other things that, specifically in the American society, complicate the situation of the dying person further. One of them is disintegration of family. Again, this probably is not true in Russia, or not yet, as the Russian society will be developing. It might start resembling the Western countries more, and might run into the same kind of problems. But very typically you find a situation that the children just completely leave the city where they grew up, where their parents are. So you might have parents living on the East Coast and children living in Hawaii, and they might have 2 telephone calls in a year. And a number of the people who are dying are basically given to the care of some professional people, but are not necessarily dying surrounded by their families. And then, of course, we don't have also any specific ways that would ease somehow the transition. Now, in addition, we have the problem of religion. We have religion that in most instances is organized religion, not religion which is based on spiritual experience. And again, this would very likely be different from Russia. My wife Christina and I were here a number of years ago when the 1st of May was celebrated, and also Easter. And we spent 3 days, and much of it in churches, and we saw how people responded to the whole ceremony of Easter. And so people literally having powerful emotions, going through states of profound sadness at the time of death, and then the ecstasy of resurrection and so on. In the United States, it looks different. People go to church and they listen to somebody telling them about experiences that people had 2,000 years ago, but you don't see really powerful emotional, personal experiences in a church. Actually, if in a typical American church, somebody would have a full-blown mystical experience, the minister, the priest, would very likely pick up the telephone and call the ambulance, you know, with the idea that these kinds of things don't belong in the church. There are exceptions. There are groups, there are sects that are considered to be kind of borderline, we would say fringe sects, kind of strange groups of people where they actually have direct experiences. There's a group of people called snake handlers, or Holy Ghost people, who play in church and dance, trance dance, so that they go into a trance and then they throw rattlesnakes and basically challenge death. Very powerful ceremonies in the Black Baptist churches, where people play, where people sing, things spirituals and so on. But many of the mainstream churches look very differently, where there is no access to direct spiritual experience. So there's much more emphasis on faith, on belief, rather than on something that's based on a profound personal experience. We have another problem, which is problem of the worldview. You know, the Western civilization has been kind of brainwashed by materialistic science into seeing the world in a certain way, which means the universe, the history of the universe is history of developing matter. Life, consciousness, intelligence, they are seen as side products of matter. For billions of years, the universe developed in such a way that it was basically composed of matter, which was dead, which was inert, which was reactive, which was passive. And then as a kind of a fluke, you know, as a very improbable accident, somehow matter created organic matter. And then again, somehow organic matter created cellular forms of life. And then again, you know, these cellular forms of life started creating multicellular organisms. And then you have the Darwinian evolution all the way to humans. And this was all happening as a result of blind natural laws. There was no guiding intelligence in the evolution. So that if you have a worldview like that, and of course those of us who lived in a communist society, like you know, here in the Soviet Union and of course in the Eastern European countries like Czechoslovakia, we really got the purest materialistic doctrine, where it was almost kind of a belligerent, you know, propagation of the very, very strict materialistic worldview, when anything spiritual was seen as opium of the masses. So we have somehow, to a great extent, accepted this materialistic worldview, where there is no place for anything spiritual. If you speak with a psychiatrist who has this traditional, so-called scientific materialistic worldview, anything that is spiritual is seen as a sort of pathology. Somebody who is spiritual is not really sufficiently educated, does not really know what materialistic science discovered about the universe. They are gullible, they are superstitious, they are into what is called in psychiatry magical, primitive thinking. If you have a person who is intelligent and is spiritual, talks about God and so on, then we have psychoanalysis that tells you that if you entertain the idea of God or goddess, you have a problem left over from childhood. You know, you carry some kind of infantile images of your father and mother, and you project them into heaven, and you make a god or goddess out of them. It's basically immature, infantile thinking. You haven't grown up so that you would accept and assume the strictly materialistic worldview, which is considered to be scientifically defined. And then if people have actual spiritual experiences, what we call these days transpersonal experiences, then they are considered sick. They will get tranquilizing medication. They will get a diagnosis. They might be hospitalized because of spiritual experiences. In psychiatry and psychology, we do not have a category. This was a mystical experience. This was a spiritual experience. They all would be called. They would be called altered states of consciousness, and it's assumed that these experiences were produced by some form of pathology that attacked the brain and basically created these experiences. But these experiences don't have any, I would say, ontological relevance. They are not real. They're hallucinations. They're phantasmagoria created by this pathological process in the brain. So that the whole image of the universe is basically image of a material system in which life, consciousness, intelligence are these sort of accidental products that happened in an immense universe after billions of years of development of matter as a kind of strange accident, and where any kind of a spiritual experience is seen actually as pathological byproduct of these material processes. Now, of course, we have people who are religious in spite of the fact that that the general scientific idea denies the relevance of anything spiritual. But even those people, to a great extent, are kind of in a conflict or undermined because the culture around them is sending a very different kind of a message. Now, this is very, very different from the situation that you find in all pre-industrial cultures, all native cultures or ancient cultures. In these cultures, death is an extremely important issue. Death plays an important role in cosmologies of these cultures, in mythologies, in philosophies of these cultures. The general belief, practically without exception, is that consciousness does not end when you die. That consciousness or life in one form or another will continue beyond that point. And they have complex descriptions of what we can call posthumous journey of the soul, what happens to a person when the body dies. And there are different forms of descriptions, from kind of shamanic maps, funeral maps, describing what this world beyond looks like, to very sophisticated concepts that you find, for example, in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the description of the different stages of the so-called intermediate state, the state between death and the next incarnation. Some of these descriptions resemble more landscapes that we know, from our everyday life. Others are described more as various hierarchies of altered states or non-ordinary states of consciousness. These cultures also have detailed maps of that world. People who die in those kinds of societies, they are surrounded by people whom they intimately know, by the members of their family, by the clan, by the tribe. They receive support, not just emotional, interpersonal support, but also ritual, very specific ritual support. And in addition, in these cultures, we find something that we can consider actually experiential training for death that is happening during their life. They are learning how to die. And in many of these cultures, you find also what has been called, with a kind of a group name, books of the dead. We have most famous, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the Tibetan Book of the Dead. There is this Mayan material, mostly represented on funeral vases, that we can call Mayan Book of the Dead. There is an Aztec, Nahuatl Book of the Dead, focusing on the figure of Quetzalcoatl. And in Europe, we had corresponding literature which has been referred to as ars moriendi, the art of dying. So, what was happening in these cultures? What were the forms that could teach you how to die? The oldest and probably the most famous form is the phenomenon of shamanism. Shamanism is the oldest healing art. It's also the oldest spiritual system. It's a system where spirituality and healing were not separated. It's actually historically continued all the way into ancient Greece. And then there was a separation between the healing tradition, doctors, and the spiritual tradition, the priests, the ministers, and so on. But in the early years, healing and spiritual ritual life basically went hand in hand. They were two sides of the same coin. They were happening simultaneously. As you will see later, this is something that happened also after the 50s, when we started working with non-ordinary states, where a process which began as therapy automatically, as we were going deeper to the roots of the problems, started turning into a process of philosophical and spiritual quest. And then therapy and healing are not separated anymore. You're doing both at the same time. In a sense, to reach certain spiritual states, you have to remove obstacles, and these obstacles are various traumatic experiences that also complicate your life. What complicates your life at the same time separates you somehow from profound spiritual experiences. So what did it look like in shamanism? First of all, shamanism is extremely ancient. We can find images of shamans, or at least figures that have been interpreted as shamans, usually figures combining human and animal elements. We can find them on the caves of the great, on the walls of the great caves in southern France and northern Spain, like Lascaux, Les Trois Frères, Font de Gaume, La Gabelou, Altamira, fantastic cave temples. And what you find there is beautiful images, some of them painted, some of them carved, or some kind of a combination of carvings and paintings. Some of them represent animals that we know existed at the time of these people in the Paleolithic era, that they hunted, that were part of their everyday life, but others are clearly magical, sort of mythological figures for which we don't have any paleontological findings. There are no fossils that would sort of confirm that those animals actually existed. Those are clearly visionary animals. And there's quite a few figures that combine actually the human elements and the animal elements. The most famous is the so-called sorcerer of Les Trois Frères. It's a combined figure that has antlers of a stag, it has eyes of an owl, it has the paws of a lion, and so on. And it's in a very, very interesting pose. There's another figure in Lascaux, figure that has been called the Beastmaster, a shamanic figure surrounded by many, many animals. In La Gabelou, there is a dancing figure of a shaman called the Dancer. So shamanism reaches back, at least 20,000 or even more years. In one of the caves, they actually found footprints in a kind of a originally muddy floor of those caves, arranged in a circular fashion, suggesting that they were conducting dances which until this day in some pre-industrial cultures are conducted to induce non-ordinary states of consciousness, to go into a trance state. So shamanism has a very, very long tradition. Shamanism is also universal. You find shamanism in Europe, in Lapland. You find it, of course, in Siberia, or different other parts of Russia. You find it in Mongolia, in Tuva. You find it among the Ainus in northern Japan. You find them in Polynesia, the Kahunas. You find them among the Eskimo people. You find the shamans and North American Indians in Mexico. You find them in South America. You find them in Australia. So shamanism is extremely ancient. It's also, we would say, universal. It's really ubiquitous. And the states of mind and the experiences which are happening have been described as manifestations of primal mind. The anthropologists talk about primal mind, which is when you have a shamanic state of mind, you connect to a type of experience that transcends race, that transcends culture, that transcends historical period, that transcends gender. It's something that's absolutely universal. And we have seen repeatedly, for example, Christina and myself did 30-month-long seminars in a place called Esselen, I don't know how many of you were yesterday at the university where Michael Murphy and Dulcie Murphy. Anybody? When Michael Murphy and Dulcie Murphy were present there, and they are the owners and the founders of Esalen. And we did 30 month-long seminars there on different subjects, and we invited a number of shamans and did rituals with shamans. Some of them Mexican, some of them South American, some of them North American. And you could see that people from our culture, when they are exposed to shamanic methods, they very quickly connect with them. They recognize that they are dealing with something that's extremely germane, that they can relate to on a very deep level. Again, you know, in Esalen we had people from different cultures, people coming from Europe, Australia, South America, modern people from industrial societies. It was unbelievable how quickly they would sort of respond to the shamanic methods. So the kind of civilized veneer that we have is just a very, very thin shell. And it's very easy when you use these powerful methods to connect to that primordial element, the primal mind. Now, why are we discussing shamanism in this context? This is because shamanism is very, very closely related to non-ordinary states of consciousness, and of course to death and dying. Maybe I'll make a little sort of semantic or linguistic clarification before we continue, because I'm using the term non-ordinary states. And yesterday at the university, I explained that in traditional psychiatry, in American psychiatry, there is a global term for these states, which is altered states of consciousness. Now, those of us who have done some serious research of these states of consciousness develop tremendous respect to what these states have to offer, what they have to offer in terms of being a tremendous source of knowledge about the psyche, about consciousness, about the nature of reality. We develop tremendous respect to the healing power, the transformative power of these states, and even evolutionary power of these states. So we didn't like the term altered. Altered means, in a way, distorted, impaired in some way. So that term that's being used in psychiatry implies that the way we experience ourselves and the world in everyday consciousness is the correct way. You see, that we see ourselves and the world accurately, the way we are and the way the world is. And when you go into an altered state, that this represents a distortion, a pathological distortion of how things should be. Now, those of us who had experiences of those states and also have, worked with thousands of people in these states, we realize that this is not correct. When you have so-called altered states of consciousness, you don't have the feeling that your understanding of yourself and the understanding of the world is distorted, is disfigured, is impaired. You actually get an idea that what you are getting is some kind of missing piece, something that you were missing for fuller understanding of who you are and what the world is about. So that brings complementary information that makes it possible to have a fuller understanding of existence. It's not a distortion of how things are, but a more profound and refined understanding of existence that's mediated by these states. And again, if they are properly understood, properly supported, these states are extremely healing and transformative and evolutionary. So those of us who have done work with these states, we initially preferred the term non-ordinary states of consciousness. Our daughter married somebody who is son of a woman who is from the Native American tribe of Ojibwe. So she's, close relative of ours. Our daughter just had a baby 2 days before we left for Prague with this man whose mother is from the Ojibwe tribe. She's also a psychologist who goes and does healing work and conflict resolution work with various Native American groups, particularly dealing with the traumas that these Native American people inflicted when they were kidnapped from the reservations by Catholics, and they were put into schools where they were basically exposed to brainwashing so that they would give up their own spirituality, their own tradition, and become kind of American Christians. And there was a lot of abuse in these residential schools. And she goes to these tribes and works with the aftermath of this kind of a psychological genocide which happened there. And so we are having these discussions, family discussions. And she tells me, Stan, I don't know why you call these states non-ordinary. She says, for my people, this is ordinary part of the spectrum of human experience. What's non-ordinary? These are just, experiences that every person can have under certain circumstances. So here I think I'm pretty avant-garde, in the academic circle, but for her, I'm what we would call, with the American slang, square. I'm sort of I have a too limited sort of understanding. If I call these states non-ordinary, I should embrace them simply as something that belongs to the full spectrum of human experience. Now I became aware, from a different perspective, I became aware of the fact that the term non-ordinary really is still limiting. There are many non-ordinary states which are not healing, which are not transformative, which don't have heuristic value, which means you don't learn a lot about the psyche or about consciousness. So, for example, you can have something that is called trivial delirium, where you would be something, for example, that can happen with high fever, typhoid fever, something that can happen with uremia, when your kidneys are failing and there's a lot of toxic products in the organism, and you would be in a delirium. You would have hallucinations. In these states you would be confused. You might not know who you are, where you are, what's happening. Your intellect is impaired. You typically would have amnesia for those states you wouldn't remember. So these are non-ordinary states, but they are not the states that we have been studying. We are interested in a certain significant subgroup of these states. States experienced by shamans or their clients. States experienced by the native culture in rites of passage. The states that were experienced by the initiates in the ancient mysteries, the states experienced by yogis, by Buddhists of different orientation, by the Taoists, by the Kabbalists, by Christian mystics, and so on. Those are the states from which we can really learn something about the nature of reality, nature of the psyche, nature of consciousness. And if these states are properly worked with, properly understood, those are the states which are healing, which are transformative, which are evolutionary. So I realized that even that term non-ordinary, which is much nicer than altered, still did not really describe the situation accurately. So I decided to coin a term myself, and I started calling this important subgroup of non-ordinary states holotropic. Holos in Greek means whole, and that part trepein, or tropic, is derived from the verb trepein in Greek, which means moving in the direction of something. You probably know the term heliotropism. Heliotropism. Helios is sun. Heliotropism is the property of the sun, of the flower, to always follow the sun or orient itself on the sun. So holotropic means moving toward wholeness, moving in the direction of wholeness. Now this usually surprises average, I would say, Westerner, but you know, it would apply equally here. The idea that we are not somehow whole the way we experience ourselves in the usual state of consciousness, that we actually do not experience our full or correct identity when we are in the ordinary state of consciousness. The best way I can describe this is to use a kind of a Hindu shorthand. The Hindus would say, we are not nama rupa, we are not name and shape. Or if you translate it for our cultures, we are not body and ego, the way we experience ourselves in everyday life. Our true identity is much larger. According to the Hindus, if we go deep enough in our self-exploration, we'll find out that we have a certain core identity, and this would be called Brahman. It's a certain sort of core of divine creative energy, absolute consciousness, and the Hindus would give you methods how to get there, various yogic techniques and so on. And if you practice them, you will get experiential validation that it is there. This is not belief. This is something that you can experience if you follow certain kinds of prescriptions, certain kinds of instructions. And when you have that experience of becoming Atman, you realize that core cosmic identity is at the same time universal cosmic identity. That means Brahman, that each of us in last analysis is actually identical and commensurate with the creative principle of the universe itself. If you read the Upanishads, there is the question, who am I? Who are you? Who are you really? And the answer in Sanskrit is Tat Tvam Asi, which means you are it. In English we usually use archaic language and we say thou art that, and it's capitalized. But what it means is you are not an ordinary human being. Your deepest nature is divine. You are identical with the creative energy of the universe, and if you follow certain rigorous procedures, you will get experiential validation of it. There's a difference between believing and knowing. There was a wonderful discussion done by BBC, a BBC reporter, with Carl Gustav Jung when he was over 80 years old. And at one point, this reporter asked him, Dr. Jung, do you believe in God? And this kind of smile, very mysterious smile, shows on Jung's face. And there's a pause, and Jung says, no. Usually Jungians, when they are watching, so what? Dr. Jung didn't believe in God? And there's a kind of a dramatic pause, and Jung continues, and he says, I don't believe, I know. I had the experience, you see, of being grabbed by something that was far bigger than I could even imagine. What he wanted to say, if you have the experience, you don't call it belief. If somebody derives certain philosophy, certain cosmology out of it, certain self-understanding, and then you get your feet back on the ground and you live your everyday life, but with this large sort of meta-framework, with this understanding that reality is really much, much larger than the one that you live in your everyday life. And that kind of broad understanding helps you to deal with difficult situations. When life puts you into difficult situations, you can somehow resort to this meta-framework which you discovered in these holotropic states. So back to the terminology. So this is what's behind that term, holotropic. The holotropic experiences are experiences that move us from our identification with the body ego, with the nama rupa, as the Hindus call it, and the deepest identity, which is the identity with cosmic creative energy. And in these holotropic states, we can experience ourselves as anything in between. We can identify with other people, we can experientially identify with different animal forms, even botanical forms. These experiences can take us into history, other cultures, other countries. Sometimes these experiences from the past have an element of personal remembering, or psychiatrists would say with a déjà vu or déjà vécu sense, which means you have an experience in another century and you have a convincing feeling, this is not the first time it's happening. I once was in that situation, and now I am remembering something that happened to me in my previous lifetime. I have already been there. That term vu, déjà vu, means I have already seen this. This is not the first time. And the term déjà vécu means I have already lived that. This is not the first time. I am living it. I am experiencing it. So these are experiences that then are a core of the quote-unquote belief in reincarnation that you find in any number of cultures. You find it in all Americas, in Northern America, in Central America, in South America. You find it in Polynesia. Of course, it's core of all the major East Indian religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, the Parsi religion, Sikhism. You find it among the Lappish people. It was part of the Jewish Kabbalistic tradition. You find it in modern times in anthroposophy, and so on. Current psychiatry would, of course, interpret this as psychotic experience that doesn't have any basis. We know that we are our body, and consciousness is the product of the brain, and when the body goes, the brain goes, and that's the end of consciousness. Any kind of talking about previous lifetimes is wishful thinking. We just can't accept the fact of our mortality and impermanence, so we make up these wishful stories that when we die, we don't really die, and there's going to be something beyond it, and the whole thing is just a fairy tale. This is a little more complicated than that. We have, significant amount of research of past life experiences that people have in these holotropic states, and a particularly convincing body of observations, we'll talk about it later, of children, little children who between the ages of 3 and 5 remember or start remembering previous lifetimes. And a very interesting researcher, Ian Stevenson from the University of Virginia, studied over 3,000 of these children, not just in India and Ceylon, places where there is belief in reincarnation, but in the United States, in Great Britain, in Turkey, in Alaska, and in other places. And in some instances, he was able to identify the village or the town that the child was talking about, took them there, and the children knew the geography of a place where they never had been. They knew the names of the people. They could show the house where they lived. And anyway, we will return to that when we talk about reincarnation. So this is the meaning behind the term holotropic. These holotropic states take us in the direction of our full identity, of our wholeness, sometimes in small steps, sometimes in large jumps. But they help us to cover ultimately the whole spectrum between who we think we are in our everyday consciousness, which means the body ego, and our fullest identity as the field of creative energy in the universe, and we can experience ourselves as anything in between. Other people, other life forms, things that were happening in the past, and so on. Okay, so the shamans typically begin their career with a spontaneous visionary state, say holotropic state. It could be just purely psychological for no reasons that can be identified. Sometimes they might be weakened by some disease, like it happened a lot among the Eskimo or in Siberia when smallpox was brought there, that really weakened these people, and then that triggered the shamanic crisis. But physical disease really is not necessary as a trigger. This can happen completely spontaneously as an episode of a transpersonal state that tends to take very specific form. It takes a form of a journey into the underworld. They might sort of lie on the ground, they might appear even dead to other people, but they have a very powerful inner experience in which they take the journey into the underworld. The underworld is typically very frightening. The different shamanic tribes might differ in the description of the underworld, but there are also commonalities. So they travel through this underworld. They get into a situation where they are exposed to some very, very difficult ordeals. when they can experience physical and emotional torture of some kind, and it culminates in dismemberment, where they have the feeling of, being taken apart. The flesh is scraped from their bones. They lose their blood. The eyes are torn out of their orbits, and they experience total annihilation. And then the next stage is that they are put together in a new form. They are reborn. They get new flesh, new blood, new eyes, and then it is followed with a magical journey. That again, there are some sort of archetypal forms of this magical journey that might vary from one culture to another. Sometimes it is, for example, the experience of being transformed into a solar bird, like an eagle, like a condor, like a thunderbird, like a falcon, and then as a bird flying into the solar realm. It can also be the other way around, that they have the experience of a giant solar eagle coming and carrying them to the solar realm. Another archetypal form is appearance of a world tree, and then climbing on the world tree again into the heavenly, into the supernal realms. It could be climbing on a rainbow. It could be climbing on a pole with notches. It could be climbing on a bridge made of arrows. But the basic, this is a basic archetype that can take specific forms in different cultures. But the basic idea is journey into the underworld, being attacked by dark forces, by evil forces, being put through tortures, being annihilated, and then being reborn and traveling into the supernal realm. There are even stories among the Siberian shamans and so on, how some shamans are created. For example, there's a tree where there is a she-eagle with feathers that are like metal feathers, and then the little shamans are on trees, and the bits and pieces of their body are being fed to evil forces. And then when they become shamans in the future, then they have the power to heal the diseases caused by the spirits who were fed by pieces of their body and so on. But in any case, there is this powerful, archetype that you find in different shamanic cultures of this journey into the underworld, death and rebirth, and travel to the supernal realm. Typically, there's also the idea that in this process, the body of the shaman is radically transformed. That, for example, they are not, their bodies are not physical anymore, but they are now bodies of light, or in some other cultures, that their bodies are turned into quartz. Now, if you have the experience, if you think about it, this doesn't relate to physical processes, that the shaman would be, made of quartz and so on, but it's the change that happens in the experience of one's own body, in a very similar way in which the true esoteric explanation of alchemy is not turning lead into gold, but through a process of psychospiritual transformation, changing the heaviness, darkness of your body into kind of an experience of the golden energy. It's a description of an inner experience, not of a process that happens in physical reality. You discover the inner gold, in other words, in the same way the shaman discovers the inner light that could be either described as light or as the quartz crystal. Now then some other really interesting things happen in this shamanic journey. They typically heal themselves. They can heal themselves from emotional diseases, from psychosomatic diseases, but in some instances from physical diseases. So the anthropologists talk about shamans as wounded healers. But not only that, but by healing themselves, they actually learn how to heal. They get, I would say, a crash course in healing, a very accelerated course in healing. If they properly integrate that experience of their own healing, they then learn how to heal others. Although many shamans also are naturalists, it means they might know different herbs or different sort of natural remedies. The essence of the shamanic healing is energy medicine. What they know, what they do, is working with energy. We are just barely beginning to accept that concept of energy medicine. Like American medicine for a long time has struggled with acupuncture, with Chinese medicine, because there was no really interpretation, understanding in the Western model that something like acupuncture could heal. But then, of course, the pragmatic results show that you can actually achieve things through acupuncture. And in Chinese medicine, the idea is as long as the vital energy, the qi, flows through the body, it's the ideal situation for healing. It's also the ideal prevention for diseases. So the concept behind this energy medicine is that blocked energy is conducive to disease. If you can sort of release the blocked energy, if you can have the energy flow, then you initiate a process of healing. So this is what the shamans learn, how to work with energy in a way that it is healing. Now, if they properly integrate that experience, then they return to their tribe and they are acknowledged as shamans. In Western anthropology, there have been arguments, obviously shamans are not healthy people. They are crazy. They have one or another form of a disease, and there was discussion, are there schizophrenics, are there borderline psychotics, are there severe hysterics, because they can be very theatrical and so on. The misconception is that these cultures, these native cultures, don't know anything about psychiatry, so anybody who experiences something that is weird, that these cultures cannot understand, is considered sacred, and these people are venerated. Now, those of us who have had a lot of contact with shamans know that this is nonsense. I mean, these cultures, they're not stupid. I mean, they know who is crazy and who is a shaman. It's not enough to have a crazy experience. You have to bring it back. You have to come back transformed with certain kind of knowledge, and you have to function at least as well as the other members of the tribe. Shamans are frequently skillful, carpenters or have some other kind of skill, gardeners. They are musicians. They conduct rituals. They are great politicians. They know all the gossip, everything that's happening in the tribe. They are practical psychotherapists. They solve problems in the tribe and so on. So this whole phenomenon of the shamanic crisis is one of the prime examples of what Christina and I call spiritual emergency. It's a situation where a very powerful, non-ordinary state actually results in healing, in transformation, and the person benefits. When we wrote the book, The Stormy Search for the Self, which defined the concept of spiritual emergency, that many states that current psychiatry considers to be mental disease can be seen as crisis of this kind of spiritual opening. We have about 10 forms of spiritual emergency, and this is a very significant one type of spiritual emergency that people can have. And this is not a type of crisis that's limited necessarily to some exotic cultures. People in our culture can have spiritual emergencies that have all characteristics of a shamanic crisis. Now, shamans then, as a result of their own experience, then can work with others, and again, they typically use non-ordinary states, holotropic states of consciousness. So in shamanic healing, the shaman can go into a holotropic state, put the client into a holotropic state, or both the shaman and the client would be in a holotropic state. Or even a whole tribe, like the Kalahari Bushmen. They can go through a trance dance through the night. It activates an energy that's very similar to Kundalini. They call it Ndum, which translates as medicine. And then you can see in these anthropological movies how the Ndum, how the energy is transmitted from one person to another. And before you know, it looks like a holotropic workshop. You know, everybody's going through a powerful process. You can see people making sounds and shaking, going through contortions. And basically group healing happens. Now the shaman, in a way, learns something about the realm which seems to be identical to the realm where we go when we are dying. So the shamans, in a way, learn how to go back and forth. They have already died, and they know the experiential realm that happens after we die, and can become what has been referred to as psychopomp, can sort of mediate it for other people to take them into the realm beyond death and bring them back. And now people who live in shamanic cultures, of course the shamans themselves, but also the people who were subjected to these procedures, they actually underwent training for dying, so that when actual death comes, it's not new for them. They have already been there. You can die before you die. Abrahama Sancta Clara, an Augustinian monk in the 17th century, German monk, wrote a very interesting sentence, which was, "The man who dies before he dies does not die when he dies." Of course, he speaks about women as well, but this is just the way it's handled grammatically in many cultures, that if you talk about a person, you use the masculine form. So the man who dies, the human who dies before he or she dies, does not die when he or she dies. Would be a kind of politically correct reformulation of that statement. Now, again, as you will see, we rediscovered this process when we started using psychedelics, and then later in holotropic breathwork, that one of the very powerful experiences you can have is the experience of death and rebirth, psychospiritual death and rebirth, very much like the shamanic initiatory crisis. And it's a very, very powerful healing mechanism. So we have now ways in modern psychiatry to help people to go through this experience of dying before dying, and as a result of it, lose the fear of death. And if you can lose fear of death, your way of being in the world will change. Because much of what we do in ordinary life is based on deep-seated fear of death that we all carry. And again, we will be returning to that problem. Just you can register here that the shamans experience death before dying, that they familiarize themselves with the realm of the posthumous realm, if you want, and they also mediate this for other people. So as they work with them, in a sense, they are learning them, they're teaching them how to die. There's another element in it, which is, as they go through this process, they experience deep connection with animals, both really existing animals, and animals that they call power animals. We could use the Jungian terminology. They would be archetypal animals, not sort of physical animals. They experience profound connection with nature, with forces of nature, and so on. And they can also assemble something that is like a group of power animals that sort of help them in the healing. Each culture seems to have different initiatory animals. Let's say the Siberian shamans, when they experience this death rebirth, it frequently comes mediated by a brown bear. They experience themselves as being torn and devoured by a brown bear, and then that becomes the animal helper. Among the Eskimo, it could be a polar bear, it could be a wolf. Among the northwestern Indians, the Haida, the Kwakiutl, the Chimshin, that is a grizzly bear. In South America, it's a jaguar. So when they have this experience of death, it can be experienced as being torn to pieces by this kind of initiatory animal, and then the idea is, for example, in the jaguar, that the animal becomes then what's called nagual. It becomes the animal helper. The novice shaman sacrificed himself or herself to the animal, and the animal power now becomes part of the healing power, part of the healing procedure. And from here we can move to another category of experiences that also represent learning to die, training for dying. And this is a very interesting institution which has been called rites of passage. Now this is a term that was coined by a Dutch anthropologist, Arnold van Gennep. It's written G-E-N-N-E-P, G-E-N-N-E-P, who studied number of native tribes, native people, and he found out that they practically all of them, without exception, developed very powerful rituals. And this happened independently in human groups that had no contact with each other. And it happened in different historical periods and different geographical periods. But they somehow all felt the need to develop this type of rituals of transition, rites of passage. These are rituals which are enacted at the time of some important biological transitions or social transitions. This would be, for example, birth, circumcision, puberty, marriage, menopause, and of course dying. There could be also rites of passage that initiate young men into a warrior status. There could be rites of passage that have to do with moving of the tribe to another territory and so on. So it's related to a number of transitions. If you study what's happening in these rites of passage, then you will find out that they, again, all revolve around this experience of psychospiritual death and rebirth. I will use as an example the most important of these rituals, which is puberty ritual. In these tribes where young boys and girls are coming of age, which of course is different. I mean, the age is a little different in different tribes. Like in the south, usually the puberty comes faster and so on. So at the time when this group is approaching puberty, the ritual is conducted. This group of these people is now separated from the rest of the tribe, and they are put through a very powerful procedure. Part of it is kind of intellectual. They might be familiarized with the mythology of the tribe, with the history of the tribe, and so on. They are in a state of separation when this is happening. The anthropologist, American anthropologist, described it as something that might be difficult to translate into Russian. These people would be betwixt and between, in a limbo state. Let's say if it's a puberty rite, once they enter the rite of passage, they are not boys and girls anymore, and they are not yet adults. They are betwixt and between, kind of in the process of transformation. And after this kind of introduction into the cosmology and the history and the mythology of the tribe, they are then put through some, extremely challenging procedure, which is very different in different tribes, but it can involve things like extended fasting, extended sleep deprivation, stay in some secluded place. In Native Americans, it's the vision quest. They might go into the mountains. The Eskimo Indians go into the Arctic ice. In some places, it might be stay in a desert, or it might be a stay in a cave, and so on. Practically in a social isolation, but in some sense, very frequently also sensory deprivation. In a cave, you would be in a sensory deprivation. You wouldn't hear things, you wouldn't see things, very much like in a sensory deprivation tank. We have done this as one of the laboratory mind-altering procedures. John Lilly developed this tank, sensory deprivation tank. Or they could be in a partial state of sensory deprivation. For example, if you spend the time in a desert, you see the desert, but the sensory experience is kind of monotonous. There is not enough sort of difference. So the monotony itself, or the Arctic ice, the monotony of the Arctic ice functions as a sensory deprivation. You see something, but it's not interesting enough, or it's not differentiated enough. So the inner world starts taking over, and you go into a non-ordinary states. In many tribes, it would involve extreme procedures. It could involve heavy bloodletting, like in the among the Lacandon Mayans in Yucatan. It could involve extreme physical pain, like the Lakota Sioux sun dance, where the initiates get skewers, hooks through the pectoral muscles, and they are sort of suspended and then rotated until the flesh is torn. Or in the plains, the Indians of the plains in America, they have, they're called the Mandan Indians. They have a ritual, complex ritual called Okipa. I have in the book, The Ultimate Journey, the pictures from this Okipa ceremony. But a significant part of it is, again, that at a certain point they are suspended on these strings with the hooks through the pectoral muscles, and they have additional hooks through their buttocks, and they have some heavy buffalo skulls hanging from the buttocks, and they are rotated until they are released when the muscles are torn, and then they have to go out and run around until they lose the buffalo skulls. And if they collapse before then, they are being dragged until the buffalo skulls are released. And then they are taken into a tent and treated as little children. They are sort of cuddled, and they are fed milk. So they literally go through a death rebirth experience that in a sense replicates birth. Now these are extreme forms of these rites of passage that are showing us how highly these cultures value these non-ordinary states. They would go to such extremes to induce them. Now, you can experience all this in a non-ordinary state internally, which is my personal preference. I would rather have the experiences inside. I can take intensity of experiences rather than have my body mutilated. But many of these tribes actually go to the point of serious physical interventions. In the Australian Aborigines, they do sub-incision, which is cutting the basis of the penis, just sort of opening the penis. And in some of them, they would file teeth away and so on. In the Mandan Okipa ceremony, they actually cut off the little fingers and so on. And then many other methods are used. Dance, to the point that it's exhausting, kind of maybe all-night dance, trance dance, music is used, instrumental music, and chanting is used. Breathing exercises are used. I refer to these methods as technologies of the sacred. We actually had 10 years ago, we had one of the international transpersonal conferences in the middle of the Amazonian jungle in a hotel, the tropical hotel, and the title of the conference was Technologies of the Sacred, Ancient, Aboriginal, and Modern. And Brazil has the advantage. There's a legal use of ayahuasca for religious ritual purposes. Ayahuasca is a jungle jhana that is cooked for a number of hours, and then some other Amazonian plants are added. It's a very, very powerful psychedelic mixture. And the Brazilian government considers it illegal for religious purposes. So it's allowed to the so-called ayahuasqueros, to the shamans in the jungle. It's allowed to a group called Santo Daime people, which is actually interesting. This is a syncretistic group that combines native Indian elements with Christian elements. And it's allowed to another group which is called Unión de Vegetal. And so all these groups can legally use ayahuasca as a ritual, not in a kind of casual way, you know, the way it's used in the West as raves, and people going into the street and taking all kinds of things. These are strictly ritual events leading to serious, powerful spiritual experiences. Many people feel that the problem of the Western culture is that we secularize the psychedelics. We abuse them as we have abused anything else, from atomic energy, you know, laser, rockets, medicine. Everything is abused in the industrial civilization. Whereas all these cultures, when they use these sacred plants, they use them in a very, very serious kind of a ritual context. So when we had the conference in Brazil, we would bring these shamans from the Andes, you know, the Peruvian shamans, Ecuadorian shamans, Brazilian shamans. We brought the Santo Daime people. We brought the people from the Union de Vegetal. We brought the psychic surgeons. Brazil has a lot of psychic surgeons. We did a large holotropic breathwork group as a pre-conference workshop. There were Jungians who were sort of using the active imagination and so on. So we were basically theoretically and practically exploring in this conference the different ways in which you can induce these holotropic experiences in a responsible, serious sort of spiritual way. So when these cultures do rites of passage, they use these powerful technologies of the sacred. So they isolate the group of the initiates, they indoctrinate them, they teach them the mythology, the history of the tribe, and then they put them through their own form of a transformation process. And if you study what is happening to these initiates, they actually go through a powerful experience of death and rebirth, very much like the shamans in their own initiatory crisis. And the way it's interpreted in these rituals is that they died in the old role and they are born now into the new role. So the idea is that you died as a boy or a girl and you were now born as an adult with all the rights and all the duties of an adult. And once you have been through this heavy-duty rite of passage, nobody in the tribe, including your parents, dares to treat you as children. You know, in our culture, you can be 60 years old and you come home, and for your parents, you are still a little daughter or son. And we have rituals, you know, which like bar mitzvah, which are really a bland decoction, which are very, very mild forms of rituals as compared to what you would be put through in a native culture. Now, people who live in these cultures that have rites of passage, when they go through their life, they participate many times in this ritual where they die and they are reborn. So they basically practice dying so that when death comes, real death, it's not new. It's just another one of those. We did a large study in Baltimore with cancer patients, terminal cancer patients, using psychedelic therapy and seeing to what extent these powerful mystical experiences could take away the fear of death and actually change the experience of dying itself. The study is described in the last part of the new book of the Ultimate Journey, where you can, you know, find the details. But we had instances there. First of all, we found out that when people had powerful death rebirth experiences and they connected to the transpersonal realm, that they emerged from those experiences without fear of death. That they didn't see death anymore as death of themselves. They saw it as death of their body. They suddenly have a kind of a sense of transpersonal identity. Yeah, because you already have the experience that the body died and you're still there, and you have an expanded state of consciousness. So you then apply it to the experience of dying. What happens at death is the body dies, but you are not the body. You are using the body, and when you die, you move into another realm, experiential realm, and the body stays back. So it's a very powerful way of eliminating or reducing the fear of death. Now, if you can do this in young people, they can lose fear of death, and it transforms their way of being. If you can live without this deep-seated fear of death, your way of being in the world would be different. You, for example, would be able to enjoy the present more. You would be less preoccupied with the past, less fantasizing, about the future, and to be able to experience more fully and enjoy more fully what is happening right here. And in that kind of process of death rebirth, you also open to spirituality. Whether you are, naturalists, atheists, skeptics, Marxists, positivistic scientists, when you have that experience, these sources of inner spirituality will open up. You will become a spiritual person, not a believer, but somebody who knows that the spiritual dimension is real. You have been there. You have experienced that. There's this possibility of dying before dying, which is great when it happens to young people, because then you have the benefit of a higher quality of life for the rest of your life. If it happens to a person who is dying of cancer, it improves their way of life, but of course they can use it only for a much shorter period of time. But they moved typically to a state where the fear of death was significantly diminished, sometimes disappeared, and they were able to enjoy life. And they developed actually an attitude which is recommended in the 12-step program. I don't know how popular or not popular the 12-step programs are in Russia. It's for treatment of alcoholism and addiction. But there what people learn is to live one day at a time, not to think about whether I will be able to stay sober for the rest of my life, but can I be sober today? And tomorrow is another day. So the cancer patients developed similar kind of attitude. Can I tolerate what's happening today? I can, and then tomorrow is another day. I'll take another look, rather than actually having anticipation that adds to the problem, which is imagining how bad things get in the future, that they get much worse than when you are in the present. So there were many, many benefits that people had. First of all, we have seen in some instances pain disappearing, even pain that didn't respond to narcotics, and not just for the time of the effect of the substance, but sometimes for several weeks the pain actually disappeared, which was a big difference. Then the fear disappeared. The people became more peaceful, more sort of be able to appreciate whatever is left from their life, and also having this sense that what is coming is more like a fantastic journey into the unknown or half known, rather than some kind of final catastrophe, the end of everything. So again, people who live in these cultures that have these powerful rituals through their life, they would have quite a few opportunities to have these experiences, so that the territory will not be new when they will be dying. In the patients that we worked with, it happened several times that the patients who had sessions with us and experienced death and rebirth then actually had a near-death experience as the cancer progressed. One patient, for example, developed obstruction of the ureter when the urine started sort of stagnating in the kidney, and he had to have an operation to open the ureter. And he had a cardiac arrest, real near-death experience during that operation, but they managed to resuscitate him. And then we talked with him, and he said, I'm very glad I had the experiences with you, because when this happened to me, the territory was not new. Otherwise, I would have been really scared, but it seemed like I really knew the territory from the previous experiences. So we had a kind of at least anecdotal confirmation that there is some deep similarity between the realms into which these non-ordinary states take us when we are alive and where we are going to go when we would be actually dying. Now the third category where this kind of learning to die happens are where the ancient mysteries of death and rebirth. Now, Joseph Campbell, I don't know how well known he is here. Is he known in Russia, Joseph Campbell and his work? Yes, he is. Yeah? He's not alive anymore. Was a brilliant mythologist, the greatest mythologist of the 20th century, probably greatest mythologist ever. Unbelievably well educated, brilliant, lexical knowledge. And in the 40s, he studied a number of cultures, and he realized, to his surprise, that they all had a particular myth or some form of a myth which he called the mono-myth. And this was a story of a person who lived ordinary life. It could actually have been an absolutely ordinary person, but in some instances it was a person, of some higher status as well. And that person would live an ordinary life, and suddenly some peculiar things start happening in their life. Some mysterious, magical things start happening. Their reality starts changing. Strange beings appear, and so on. And it takes them to what he called the threshold of adventure. Suddenly, they are given some task, or they are put into some situation that takes them into the world that is radically different from the world that we know. It could be a journey into the underworld, or into some kind of a fairy tale type of world. They would be put through some really dangerous, difficult challenging situations, ordeals, and ultimately they might end up being killed or even dismembered, and then coming back together, being reborn, and then returning, crossing the threshold of adventure, returning into life, and again, if the whole story ended well, they become enlightened rulers, they become seers, become great leaders or spiritual leaders. And they underwent this tremendous sort of adventure. And it seems like all major cultures had stories of this kind. Some of them involving women, many of them involving men. So one of the oldest ones is the story of Inanna. You see, the Sumerian goddess who lost lover, Dumuzi, and went into the underworld to find elixir of life to bring him back to life, and underwent this adventure. There is the story of Odysseus visiting the underworld, Orpheus visiting the underworld, and so on. Some of these stories involve the visit into the underworld, which was the realm of the dead. Some of them involved actually being killed or killing oneself. So there's a story of Osiris, who was tricked by his brother Set, and he was dismembered, and the parts of his body was kind of distributed, all over the Nile Delta. And then the two sisters, Isis and Nephthys, collected the pieces of Osiris, resurrected him, and then he became the ruler of the underworld. Dionysus was torn to pieces by the Titans and was resurrected. Persephone was abducted into the underworld by Hades, and then was returned for part of the year. In the Mesoamerican culture, we have the story of Quetzalcoatl, represented usually as the plumed serpent, who was given pulque, which is an intoxicating beverage from the agave plant. He got drunk and seduced his sister. And then when he sobered up, he decided to immolate himself on a funeral pyre. And then he traveled through the different regions of the underworld and emerged, transformed into planet Venus and so on. It's a story of Wotan, who was hanging on the Yggdrasil and was trading his eye for the knowledge of the runes and so on. So there are many of these heroic stories in different parts of the world. And Joseph Campbell wrote this really brilliant book called The Hero with a Thousand Faces, and called this story of the hero monomyth. And then, of course, he was thinking, what is this? This kind of stories appeared in so many different cultures, in so many different historical periods. What's behind it? What does it mean? And then he found a very brilliant solution. And these are not some kind of fictitious story about, non-existing heroes in some kind of non-existing countries. But this is really a description of a journey of inner transformation. Then when the hero crosses the threshold of adventure, it's actually the time when unconscious material starts emerging into consciousness, and they go on a journey through their own unconscious. And they go through the process of death, rebirth, and when they are crossing back the threshold of adventure, they are integrating the process and getting their feet on earth, and they are now returning into life transformed with a new knowledge and having experienced spiritual opening and getting to know the world, the universe, existence, and themselves in a very, very new way. Now, when you now look at it, in many of these places that had these myths about death, rebirth, they were institutions, mysteries of death and rebirth, where they actually put the initiates through some powerful procedure in which they experience, again, psychospiritual death and rebirth. And it was interpreted as, in some sense, identifying with the deity of the underlying myth. So, in such a way that they were connected to the deity of the myth. So, in Egypt, there were mysteries of Isis and Osiris. In ancient Greece, there were quite a few of them. There were the Bacchanalia, the Dionysian rites. There were the Eleusinian mysteries, the most powerful, the most famous form of these mysteries. There were mysteries of Attis, mysteries of Adonis. In Asia Minor, again, there were a number of similar kinds of mysteries. In Mesoamerica, there were the mysteries of Xibalba. Those were actually Mayan mysteries, which were based on the story of the hero twins, who again were invited by the lords of the underworld to play ball, and they were put through a lot of ordeals in which they died and were reborn then as celestial bodies. There were Nordic mysteries of Wotan and so on, mysteries of Mithra. So what was the common denominator of all these mysteries? They used some powerful mind-altering techniques where the initiates had a very convincing experience of dying and being born, and as a result of it, they lost the fear of death. And when they lost the fear of death, their way of being was radically transformed. They now were in the world without the fear of death, and the quality of their life was very, very strongly influenced. And of course, they had now a spiritual worldview based on personal experience. You know, not a belief in something that somebody told them to believe or something that they read, but they had a cellular experience that they had been in the realm of death, and they returned. So the interesting question is, what were they using to induce these experiences? Where we have most knowledge is about the Eleusinian mysteries. The place actually is called Elefsis. It's about 16 miles from Athens in Greece. These mysteries there were conducted for a period of almost 2,000 years, okay, from about 1500 BC to 400 AD. Initially, they were kind of a local Athenian cult. Later, anybody could come who spoke Greek, and then at the time of Graecia Magna, anybody basically who was member of this Graecia Magna could participate in these mysteries. People were traveling incredible distances to participate in these mysteries. These mysteries were happening every 5 years, the large mysteries, and then there were annual small mysteries. Now, the list of the people who participated in the Greek mysteries reads like who is who in antiquity. Do you know that term? We have in the United States books, who is who in medicine, who is who in science, and a lot of people want to be in those books. You know, who are the VIPs? Who is who is really an important person in a certain realm. So the list of the participants reads like who is who in antiquity. The initiates were Plato, Aristotle. Aristotle actually coined the term catharsis, the cleansing, the emotional cleansing that happened in these mysteries. Plato distinguished 4 forms of spiritual madness. He said there was one madness which was just ordinary madness. We would say like mental disease, you know, in psychiatric terms. And then there were, according to him, 4 forms of divine madness, which were basically possessions of deities. Again, in Jungian terminology, it would be being taken over or inflated by an archetype. Okay. So there was the madness of the lovers. People who are in love can act very crazy. So this was Aphrodite and Eros, who were possessing people. There was the kind of a clairvoyant madness, which was possession by Apollo. This was like what was happening to Pythia when she was having clairvoyant visions. There was artistic madness, which was possession by one of the muses. You know, when artists are in a state of inspiration, they can act crazy. It was known about Beethoven, for example, when he got inspiration for a piece of music, he would sit down in the middle of the street, and people in the neighborhood knew him, so the horses were kind of going by him, and he was composing. You know, had it been in modern times when we have psychiatry, we wouldn't have, probably would have lost a few of the musical pieces because they would have taken him to a hospital. So there is an artistic madness, possession by one of the muses, depending on the form of creativity that it takes. And then the fourth form that Plato has, he called telestic madness or ritual madness. This is seeming craziness that is happening to people who are participating in a ritual. We know that in the Corybantic ritual that he was interested in, they were using definitely wines, they were using kind of frantic, extended dance and music. And we know now that the wines that were used in these rituals, particularly the Dionysian, the Bacchanalian rituals, were not just ordinary wines. In the book that I will be talking about, called The Road to Eleusis, written by Albert Hofmann, the discoverer of LSD, Gordon Wasson, his friend who was the one who brought the magic mushrooms from Mexico to Europe. With his wife and a photographer, they were the first Europeans admitted to a Mazatec ceremony in Mexico using sacred mushrooms, and they managed to bring the mushrooms, gave them to Albert Hofmann, and Albert Hofmann isolated psilocybin and psilocin, 2 of the active principles of that kind of mushrooms. Now, they wrote in this book about these so-called wines, and they pointed to the fact that the description of the wine was such that the wines had to be diluted 6 to 20 times, and sometimes even 3 cups of those wines brought people to the edge of madness. Now, the Greeks didn't know distillation, so the strongest wines they could have was like 14%, because then the concentration of the alcohol is such that it starts killing the bacteria, so the process of fermentation stops. They couldn't have anything stronger than 14%. Now, if you would have a wine which is 14%, you dilute it 6 or 20 times, then 1 or 3 cups, would not bring you to the edge of madness. So Gordon Wasson and Albert Hofmann strongly believe that they basically the wines were used to dilute some very powerful psychedelic substances. And I'll return to that when we talk about the Eleusinian mysteries. So in these Corybantic mysteries, they were using these wines, they were using frantic dancing, and they were using music. And Aristotle, when he wrote about it, he said that this was the temporary craziness, the chaos, the madness that actually ultimately was conducive to order. People basically acted out all kinds of wild emotions and released all kinds of pent-up energies, and they experienced catharsis. So that the chaos of these mysteries actually was conducive to higher order. There was a very interesting myth about Dionysus, who supposedly came to the city of Thebes, and he invited the citizens to what he called lesser dance of Dionysus, which was basically the Dionysian ritual. And they mocked him, and they refused him, and as a result of it, he sent on them this larger dance of Dionysus, which was real madness. And the whole city went crazy. They ran into the woods, and they mistook their prince for a lion, and they killed him, and his own mother brought his head on a spear. Now, what is this? The rationale of the story is that the kind of controlled madness, socially sanctioned controlled madness in these mysteries actually functioned as protection against real madness. People in a controlled situation were able to express some dangerous, destructive and self-destructive tendencies, and as a result were more sane. When in humanistic psychology experiential therapy came, there was one slogan that was being used in these different workshops: go ape, become human. Basically, you allow yourself, to express all kinds of emotions, and as a result of it, you will be more peaceful, more comfortable with yourself. So Aristotle was an initiate. Plato was an initiate. Alcibiades, the military leader, was an initiate. Pindaros was an initiate. Cicero, Marcus Tullius Cicero, actually wrote in his book De Legibus about the benefit of these mysteries. I don't know if you saw here the movie The Gladiator. Marcus Aurelius, that Caesar, which is there, he was one of the initiates and so on, conducting their own private mysteries in their homes in Athens. Now, it would be very difficult to replicate some kind of grandiose theatrical tricks, special effects in private homes, where it would be very easy to take a picture of Kikeon and take it from Eleusis to Athens. So anyway, this very likely, this was a religion where powerful experiences were induced by this Kikeon, by this beverage, by this sacred beverage. And again, one after another of these people, they couldn't talk about anything specific about these mysteries. There was a punishment by death of anybody who would reveal the ultimate mysteries. But they made general statements, for example, that they lost the fear of death, that as a result of it, their life was transformed. Cicero, in his book De Legibus, extols these mysteries and says they made us civilized people. They changed savages into civilized people. Part of the things that happens in this kind of process of death and rebirth is that an enormous amount of aggression is consumed. People become very, very peaceful. You develop compassion. You develop a sense of connection with other people, with nature, and so on. Are we that far? Okay. Let me see what else to say about these mysteries. So, this was an extremely, extremely important institution. If you imagine that the world was much smaller than it is today, and that every 5 years, 3,000 people from that world, and many of them very prominent personages, had these powerful holotropic experiences, you realize it had to have significant impact on the culture. You know, we like to talk about Greece as the cradle of European civilization. See, we have the feeling the Greeks were very intelligent people. They had all kinds of interesting ideas and so on. Well, if you consider the possibility that something like Kikeon played a significant role there, you know that tremendous inspiration can come from non-ordinary states. There's a wonderful book by Willis Harman, which is called Higher Creativity, where he gives an enormous number of examples where people who were working on a problem and couldn't solve it in a non-ordinary state, in a holotropic state, not necessarily with psychedelics. For Friedrich Kekulé, who discovered the formula for benzene, it was just a hypnagogic state when he was kind of watching the fire in the fireplace and got into this dreamlike state and suddenly got the image of the benzene molecule. Okay? Albert Einstein had a spontaneous state where actually some of the basic ideas of the theory of relativity came to him in the form of kind of physical, proprioceptive, non-ordinary experiences. Schrödinger, the solution of a problem in quantum physics that he couldn't solve when he was in Helgoland and got a terrible case of hay fever and got into a non-ordinary state that he could hardly think, and suddenly the solution came because the ordinary barriers of thinking were dissolved. So he gives also, you know, a number of course, examples of musicians where, for example, Puccini said, I didn't write Madame Butterfly. It was God. I was just holding the pen, and something sort of came through. Mozart said whole symphonies appeared in his head in a finished form. Rilke, the 40 stanzas of the sonnets to Orpheus came, and he put it on paper, didn't have to change a single letter in that. So that this kind of higher creativity, tremendous ideas can come in these non-ordinary states. And particularly if you are dealing with somebody who has certain knowledge, already knows the problems of a certain area, there's a lot of information, but cannot find some higher synthesis. And the non-ordinary state can really bring tremendous inspiration. The most interesting, if ever something like psychedelics comes back, the most interesting area would be to work with people like modern physicists or people highly creative who are solving some of the ultimate problems of the nature of reality and so on. Fantastic inspiration could come for these people from these states. So today when I think about Plato, I don't see him pacing around in the academy and saying, well, let me see how the world works. So let's say we don't have just this level, there's this other level where there are these ideas, these forms, these archetypes and so on. Obviously those were experiences in these holotropic states when you have direct experience of those dimensions of reality. This is not part of the ordinary thinking, ordinary speculation. This is a direct kind of an illumination. But yesterday I talked about the fact that when Freud was trying to understand art, the content of art, when he was doing the study about Leonardo, about Dostoevsky, about Hamlet and so on, he said psychoanalysis could help us only to understand where the content of art comes from, but cannot explain really, a genius cannot explain the process of creativity itself. The transpersonal psychology brings really the answer to that. This higher creativity is not product of an individual psyche. This is a situation where the person becomes a channel for these higher transpersonal energies and becomes just an agent who sort of has the means, has the technical means and so on to bring it to this level and shape it in a certain form. But the greatest inspiration is really not concocted in an individual head, but is coming from the anima mundi, from a cosmic matrix. Okay, so thank you for the marathon, and we'll have a break. How long is the break?